She bought a rotting, forgotten church for the price of a cheap dinner, expecting a massive renovation project. But when midnight intruders started violently tearing up the floorboards, Harper realized St. Jude's wasn't just abandoned. It was guarding a century-old secret, and the town's elite would kill to keep it buried. The gavel cracked against the polished oak podium, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the damp, drafty gymnasium of the Ashborough Town Hall. "Sold," auctioneer Vernon Tate grunted, wiping a sheen of sweat from his balding forehead. "To the young lady in the back, $200 for the St. Jude property." Harper Mitchell kept her hand raised for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't quite believe what had just happened. She was 31, a heavily indebted architectural restorer whose last firm had gone bankrupt, leaving her with pennies to her name and a desperate need for a miracle. She had driven to the dying coal town of Ashborough, Pennsylvania, purely on a rumor of cheap historic real estate. But she never expected to buy a massive Gothic revival church for the cost of a couple of tanks of gas. As the scattered crowd of locals murmured, a tall, immaculately dressed man in the front row turned to lock eyes with her. It was Mayor Donovan Hayes. His family had run Ashborough since the 1800s, and his expression was a terrifying mixture of shock and quiet, boiling rage. He had bid $150, a token amount to acquire the land for the city, assuming no one in their right mind would challenge him for a condemned building. When Harper threw out her $200 bid, Donovan had hesitated, a fatal miscalculation of pride. He hadn't wanted to look desperate in front of his constituents by engaging in a bidding war over a worthless pile of bricks. Now, the church was hers. Harper grabbed her battered leather tote bag and pushed through the double doors into the biting October wind. She drove her rusted station wagon to the edge of town, where the asphalt faded into a cracked dirt road. There, looming against the bruised grey sky, stood St. Jude's. It was a terrifyingly beautiful monstrosity. Blackened stone spires pierced the low-hanging clouds, and the massive rose window above the double oak doors was shattered, resembling a jagged, empty eye. The church had been deconsecrated and boarded up in the late 1920s, officially due to structural instability following a minor earthquake. But as Harper stepped out of her car, the crushing silence of the property felt less like abandonment and more like a quarantine. She snapped the rusted padlock off the front doors with a pair of heavy bolt cutters and pushed her way inside. The air was thick, tasting of mildew, old incense, and something undeniably metallic. Shafts of pale light pierced through the broken stained glass, illuminating an interior that was remarkably well preserved beneath an inch of dust. The pews were solid mahogany, the vaulted ceiling held its shape, and the grand stone altar remained perfectly intact. "It's a gold mine," Harper thought, pulling out her camera. "If I can stabilize the foundation, the salvage rights alone are worth $50,000. She spent the afternoon cataloging the main floor. But as dusk settled and shadows stretched like long fingers across the aisles, an unsettling feeling washed over her. It was the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. She dismissed it as the paranoia of being alone in a spooky old building. Setting up a camping cot in the old vestry, she couldn't afford a motel. She locked the heavy wooden door, wrapped herself in a sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. At 2:13 a.m., the sound of tearing wood jolted her awake. Harper froze, her breath catching in her throat. The noise wasn't the natural settling of an old building. It was the violent, rhythmic sound of crowbars ripping through thick timber. She slipped out of her cot, her bare feet silent against the cold stone of the vestry floor. Peeking through a crack in the door, She saw 3 figures moving in the main nave. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks. Flashlights cut frantic arcs across the peeling plaster walls. They weren't vandalizing the church. They were dismantling it with terrifying precision. "Check the coordinates again," a deep, muffled voice hissed. The old man said it was 20 paces from the chancel steps. "Start prying." Harper pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. They were looking for something. The screech of rusted nails pulling free from ancient oak echoed through the cavernous space as the men tore up a massive section of the central aisle. Suddenly, the wail of a distant police siren pierced the night. It wasn't headed for the church, but the sound was enough to spook the intruders. "We're out of time. Grab the gear. We'll come back when the new owner isn't squatting here," the leader ordered. Within seconds, they vanished through a side window, melting into the surrounding forest. Harper waited 20 agonizing minutes before she dared to step out of the vestry. She approached the gaping hole they had left in the floorboards. Clicking on her heavy-duty flashlight, she aimed the beam into the dark hollow beneath the church. There, hidden beneath the century-old wood, was a heavy iron trapdoor set into a concrete foundation. Engraved into the rusted metal was a single, terrifying Latin phrase: "In tenebris, veritas." In darkness, truth. The next morning, Harper sat on the steps of St. Jude's, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee she'd bought from a gas station down the road. She hadn't called the police. In a town like Ashborough, where Mayor Donovan Hayes essentially owned the police force, telling the authorities about a secret iron trapdoor felt like painting a target on her own back. Instead, she had spent the early hours of dawn doing research at the local library, cross-referencing property records. That was where she met Harrison Gallagher. Harrison was a retired archivist in his late 60s, with wild grey hair and eyes that darted nervously behind thick spectacles. When Harper had asked for the blueprints of St. Jude's, he had looked at her as if she had just asked for a loaded weapon. Now, Harrison's beat-up truck pulled up to the church. He stepped out, carrying a rolled-up tube of architectural drafts. "You're the girl who humiliated Donovan Hayes at the auction," Harrison said, his voice a gravelly whisper as he approached. "You have no idea what you've stepped into, Miss Mitchell." "I bought a church, Harrison, not a cartel," Harper shot back, though her hands trembled slightly. "Show me the plans." Harrison unrolled the blueprints on the hood of his truck. "St. Jude's was built in 1892, but look at the foundation." He pointed to a secondary schematic, drawn in faded blue ink. In 1910, an anonymous donor funded a massive reinforcement of the undercroft. They poured concrete walls 3 feet thick. They installed industrial ventilation. Does that sound like a root cellar for communion wine to you? "It sounds like a bunker," Harper murmured. "It sounds like a vault," Harrison corrected. "Have you ever heard of the 1912 Ashborough Syndicate heist?" Harper shook her head. In the winter of 1912, a train carrying $4 million in untraceable gold bullion, payroll for the steel barons, was derailed just outside this town, Harrison explained, his eyes scanning the tree line. The money vanished. The federal agents scoured the county for years, but found nothing. The local sheriff at the time who led the investigation, William Hayes, Mayor Donovan's great-grandfather. The pieces violently snapped together in Harper's mind. The cheap bid at the auction. The intruders tearing up the floor exactly 20 paces from the chancel. "The gold is under the church," Harper whispered, "and the mayor knows it." "His family has probably known for a century," Harrison said grimly. "But the church was owned by the diocese, locked in legal limbo. Father Sullivan, the last priest here, refused to let anyone dig. He claimed the grounds were cursed, When the diocese finally went bankrupt last month, the town seized the deed for unpaid taxes. Donovan thought he could just scoop it up quietly at a public auction. Until I bid $200, Harper said, a chilling realization washing over her. A sleek black Lincoln town car crunched onto the gravel driveway, interrupting them. Harrison went pale, rolled up his blueprints, and quickly backed away. Trust no one, Harper, especially not him. He hurried to his truck and sped off just as the Lincoln's doors opened. Mayor Donovan Hayes stepped out. In the harsh daylight, his tailored suit looked dangerously out of place against the rotting backdrop of St. Jude's. He offered a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Miss Mitchell," Donovan purred, stopping a few feet from her. "I hear you had a bit of a break-in last night. Such a shame. This old neighborhood attracts vagrants." "Word travels fast, Mayor. I didn't file a police report," Harper said, keeping her posture rigid. Donovan chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. "I keep a close eye on my town. Look, I'll get straight to the point. You're in over your head. The foundation is toxic, the roof is caving in, and it's completely unsafe. I am prepared to write you a personal check right now for $50,000. You take the money, you drive back to wherever you came from, and you start a nice, comfortable life." $50,000. It was more money than Harper had seen in 5 years. It would clear her debts. It would save her career. But as she looked at Donovan, she saw the faint, desperate twitch in his jaw. He wasn't trying to help her. He was trying to buy her silence. "The property is not for sale, Mayor," Harper said, her voice steady. "I have a lot of work to do." Donovan's smile vanished. The mask of the benevolent politician slipped, revealing something deeply ruthless beneath. "Ashborough is a very unforgiving place for outsiders, Miss Mitchell. Accidents happen in old buildings. Floorboards give way. People fall. Consider my offer. It will not be extended again." He turned on his heel, got back into the Lincoln, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Harper didn't waste another second. She ran back inside the church, grabbed her heavy crowbar and a high-powered lantern, and marched to the hole in the floor. She wedged the crowbar under the rusted iron ring of the trapdoor. It took every ounce of her strength, her muscles screaming in protest. But with a sickening groan of metal, the heavy door heaved upward, revealing a dark, stone-carved staircase spiraling down into the earth. A blast of cold, stale air rushed up to greet her. Harper clicked on her lantern and began the descent. The stairs were slick with condensation. After about 30 feet, the narrow stairwell opened up into a massive, subterranean tunnel. Harrison was right. The walls here weren't rough dirt. They were reinforced with heavy steel beams and poured concrete, riveted with industrial bolts. As she walked deeper into the tunnel, the silence grew heavy and oppressive. The beam of her lantern cut through the darkness, illuminating old wooden crates, rotting canvas bags, and rusted pickaxes discarded a century ago. Suddenly, her boot kicked something hard. It rolled across the concrete floor with a hollow clatter. Harper lowered the light. It was a human skull. She stumbled backward, a gasp ripping from her throat. As she stabilized her light, the rest of the gruesome scene came into view. Slumped against the far wall of the tunnel was a fully intact human skeleton, dressed in shredded, moth-eaten remnants of a 1910s police uniform. Protruding from the ribcage was the rusted hilt of a hunting knife. But it wasn't the skeleton that made Harper's blood run cold. The skeletal fingers were tightly clamped around an ornate iron lockbox, and sitting directly behind the dead man was a massive, impenetrable vault door forged from solid steel, secured by a complex mechanical dial. Harper stepped closer, her heart pounding violently in her ears. She gently pried the rusted lockbox from the skeleton's grip. The lock was brittle. One strike from her crowbar shattered it. Inside the box lay a single, heavy brass key and a folded piece of parchment stained with dried, century-old blood. Harper carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The elegant cursive handwriting was barely legible, but the words sent a shockwave of absolute terror through her body. If you are reading this, William Hayes has betrayed us all. The gold is sealed, but the vault is rigged. Do not turn the dial. He buried me alive to keep the secret, but I have hidden the master cylinder. The mayor's bloodline will burn before they take what is ours. Harper stared at the vault door, realizing she was standing in a tomb. And as the faint, unmistakable sound of the church's heavy oak doors slamming shut echoed from the world above, she realized she wasn't alone in the dark. Someone had followed her down. Harper instantly killed the power to her heavy-duty lantern, plunging the subterranean concrete tunnel into absolute, suffocating darkness. She pressed her spine against the freezing, damp wall, her breath trapped painfully in her lungs. The rusted crowbar felt thiok in her sweating palms. From the top of the spiraling stone staircase, the slow, methodical thud of heavy combat boots echoed downward, accompanied by the bright, sweeping beam of a tactical flashlight. "You really should have taken the $50,000, Miss Mitchell," a raspy, cigarette-stained voice called out. The voice reverberated off the reinforced steel beams, making it impossible to pinpoint his exact location. Harper recognized the tone immediately. It was the man who had been driving Mayor Donovan Hayes's sleek black Lincoln town car earlier that afternoon. His name was Boyd, a local enforcer who handled the dirty work for the Hayes political dynasty. Boyd descended deeper into the tunnel, his flashlight beam slicing through the stale, century-old air. The light narrowly missed Harper, illuminating the sprawling dust motes and the rotting wooden crates stacked haphazardly along the corridor. She closed her eyes, trying to control the violent shaking in her limbs. She was trapped 40 feet underground, with an armed man, a dead body, and a fortune soaked in blood. "The mayor is a very patient man, but even he has his limits," Boyd continued, his footsteps crunching softly against the loose gravel. "He knew someone would eventually pry up those floorboards. That is why I have been watching the property since the moment the gavel fell at the auction. You are trespassing on family legacy, little bird." Harper knew she could not outrun him. The only exit was the staircase he was currently blocking. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the peripheral darkness. She remembered the layout of the tunnel from the brief moment her lantern had been illuminated. To her left, there was a stack of rusted pickaxes and heavy iron mining equipment left behind by the 1910 reinforcement crew. If she could cause a distraction, she might be able to slip past him or disarm him. She bent down with agonizing slowness, and her fingers brushed against a heavy, loose stone. With a swift, calculated motion, Harper hurled the rock deep into the far corner of the tunnel, far beyond the steel vault. The stone clattered loudly against a metal barrel. Boyd whipped around, his flashlight beam darting toward the noise, and the distinctive metallic click of a handgun being cocked echoed in the narrow space. "Who is back there?" Boyd barked, moving quickly toward the sound, his back momentarily turned to Harper. It was her only chance. Harper lunged forward from the shadows, raising the heavy crowbar with both hands. She swung it with every ounce of adrenaline surging through her veins. aiming not for his head, but for the hand holding the weapon. The iron bar connected with a sickening crunch. Boyd let out a roar of immense pain as the handgun flew from his shattered grip, sliding across the concrete floor and plunging into the darkness. Before Boyd could retaliate, Harper drove her shoulder into his chest, using her momentum to shove him violently backward. He tripped over the skeletal remains of the long-dead police officer, his head striking the heavy, solid steel of the vault door with a dull thud. Boyd slumped to the ground, completely unconscious. Harper stood over him, her chest heaving, the crowbar still raised defensively. When she was absolutely certain he was out cold, she scrambled to find his dropped tactical flashlight. Clicking it on, she bathed the grim scene in bright white light once more. She quickly retrieved Boyd's fallen pistol, slipping the cold weapon into the waistband of her denim jeans. Her immediate threat was neutralized, but she knew Mayor Donovan would not be far behind. She turned her attention back to the grim puzzle laid out before her. The skeleton, the vault, the blood-stained note. Harper knelt beside the remains. The uniform was shredded, but a tarnished silver badge still clung to the fabric. She wiped away the grime. It read, Josiah Higgins, Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Harrison's historical account of the 1912 Ashboro Syndicate heist flooded her mind. William Hayes, the town sheriff and Donovan's great-grandfather, had supposedly led the investigation into the stolen train payroll. But the note proved the horrifying truth. Sheriff Hayes hadn't investigated the heist. He had orchestrated it. He had hired a corrupt Pinkerton agent to steal the $4 million in untraceable gold bullion, and then to silence his only accomplice. Hayes had locked Josiah Higgins in this underground vault, burying him alive beneath St. Jude's Church. He buried me alive to keep the secret, but I have hidden the master cylinder. Harper read the note again. The gold is sealed, but the vault is rigged. Do not turn the dial. If Sheriff Hayes had rigged the vault, turning the mechanical dial without the master cylinder would likely trigger a deadly fail-safe. Mining explosives were common in Ashboro during the early 1900s. A single wrong turn could collapse the entire church down upon her. She needed the cylinder. Josiah had hidden it before he died. Harper systematically searched the area around the skeleton. She checked the rusted lockbox, finding nothing but dust. She checked the pockets of the ruined uniform, her fingers trembling as she brushed against brittle bone. Nothing. Panic began to claw at her throat. Where would a dying man hide the only key to his revenge? She stared at the massive, impenetrable vault door forged by the Mosler Safe Company. It was a masterpiece of 19th-century engineering. And then a realization struck her like a physical blow. Josiah hadn't hidden the cylinder in the dirt. He had hidden it in plain sight. Harper leaned close to the skeleton. Clenched tightly between Josiah's skeletal jaws, glinting faintly in the harsh flashlight beam, was a small, perfectly machined brass cylinder. He had swallowed it, or at least tried to, keeping it securely hidden within his own body to ensure Hayes would never find it. Suppressing a wave of nausea, Harper carefully extracted the brass piece. It was covered in dried residue, but perfectly intact. She approached the vault door. Below the main combination dial, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible keyhole meant for factory resets. She slid the brass cylinder into the slot. It fit perfectly. Taking a deep breath, Harper inserted the heavy brass key she had found in the lockbox into the main latch. She turned the key, and a loud, satisfying mechanical clank echoed through the chamber. The internal tumblers shifted. The explosive fail-safe had been bypassed. She grasped the heavy iron wheel of the vault and pulled. With a sound like a groaning beast, the massive steel door slowly swung open, revealing the lost secrets of Ashborough. The interior of the vault was perfectly preserved, a hermetically sealed time capsule from 1912. The tactical flashlight beam illuminated row upon row of heavy canvas bags, many of which had rotted away over the century to reveal their contents. Stacked from the floor to the ceiling were hundreds of gleaming, perfectly cast gold bars. Each bullion piece was stamped with the official insignia of the United States Assay Office. The sheer volume of wealth was staggering. It wasn't just a fortune. It was an empire built on blood and betrayal. Resting on a small wooden table in the center of the vault was a leather-bound ledger. Harper opened it. The pages were filled with William Hayes's meticulous handwriting, detailing every bribe, every stolen shipment, and every murder he had committed to build the Hayes family fortune. This ledger was the absolute proof needed to destroy Mayor Donovan's corrupt legacy once and for all. "It is magnificent, isn't it?" Harper froze. The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. She turned slowly to see Mayor Donovan Hayes standing in the tunnel entrance. He had bypassed the heavy church doors and silently descended the stairs. He was impeccably dressed in his tailored suit, but he was holding a high-powered hunting rifle, aiming it squarely at Harper's chest. Behind him, Boyd was beginning to stir, groaning in pain as he clutched his bleeding head. "I must thank you, Miss Mitchell," Donovan said, stepping carefully into the vault, his eyes wide with greed as the gold reflected against the flashlight beam. "My family has searched for the master cylinder for 4 generations. My great-grandfather tore this tunnel apart, but could never find where that wretched Pinkerton agent hid it. You have finally restored what rightfully belongs to my family." "It belongs to the federal government," Harper countered, subtly shifting her weight. She still had Boyd's pistol tucked into her waistband, hidden beneath her jacket. "Your great-grandfather stole this gold. He murdered Josiah Higgins, and this ledger proves that your entire political dynasty was funded by a massive criminal syndicate." Donovan laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "History is written by the victors, Harper. In Ashborough, my family writes the history. Who is going to believe a bankrupt architect over the mayor? Tonight, there will be a tragic structural collapse at St. Jude's. The unstable foundation will finally cave in, burying the unfortunate new owner beneath tons of concrete. A sad, unavoidable accident. And the Hayes family will quietly reclaim our ancestral wealth." He raised the rifle, aiming it directly at her forehead. "Put the ledger down and step away from the gold." Harper's mind raced. She remembered the trap Josiah had warned about in the note. "The vault is rigged. Do not turn the dial." She had bypassed the explosive trigger by using the master cylinder to open the door, but the primary explosive mechanism, built into the main mechanical dial by William Hayes, was still active. If the dial was turned incorrectly now, while the vault was open, the spark would ignite the century-old dynamite buried in the tunnel walls. "You want the gold, Donovan," Harper said, her voice eerily calm as she took a calculated step backward, positioning herself near the heavy steel door. "Take it." She reached out, grabbed the main combination dial on the interior of the vault door, and spun it violently to the right. The loud, terrifying sound of gears grinding instantly filled the room, followed by a sharp, metallic snap from deep within the concrete walls. Donovan's eyes widened in sheer panic. "What did you just do?" "I triggered your great-grandfather's fail-safe," Harper shouted. A deep, rumbling vibration shook the entire subterranean chamber. dust began to pour from the ceiling. A terrifying, hissing sound echoed from the far end of the tunnel as the ancient mining explosives, volatile and unstable from a century of decay, began to detonate in a chain reaction. Donovan hesitated, his greed warring with his survival instinct. He looked at the mountain of gold, then at the crumbling ceiling. That momentary hesitation was all Harper needed. She drew the stolen pistol from her waistband and fired a single shot into the air, forcing Donovan to flinch and dive for cover behind the heavy wooden table. Harper grabbed the leather-bound ledger, sprinted past the vault door, and shoved Boyd violently out of her path as she scrambled up the spiraling stone staircase. The explosions grew louder, shaking the very foundation of the earth. Concrete cracked and groaned. She reached the trapdoor and hauled herself up onto the church floor just as a massive blast rocked the undercroft beneath her. The shockwave threw her across the nave. The floorboard splintered and collapsed, sealing the iron trapdoor beneath tons of shattered oak and rubble. The underground tunnel had completely caved in, burying Donovan Hayes, his enforcer, and the $4 million in stolen gold under thousands of pounds of impenetrable debris. Harper lay on the dusty floor of the church, gasping for air, her lungs burning. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, but this time she wasn't afraid. She clutched the leather ledger tightly against her chest. By dawn, federal investigators swarmed the ruined sanctuary of St. Jude's. Harrison Gallagher arrived shortly after, helping Harper hand the ledger over to the FBI. The evidence was irrefutable. The ledger not only proved the 1912 heist, but also contained enough historical financial records to completely dismantle the Hayes family empire, freezing their assets and exposing a century of political corruption. Harper Mitchell didn't keep the gold. It was heavily buried and technically federal property. But she didn't need it. The government awarded her a massive historical recovery bounty, more than enough to pay off her debts and fully restore St. Jude's. The abandoned, rotting church was soon transformed into the Ashborough Historical Museum, a beautiful, towering testament to the truth. And in the center of the main hall, beneath the glorious, newly repaired rose window, stood a plaque dedicated to Josiah Higgins, the man who waited 100 years in the dark to finally see justice done. If you were captivated by this heart-stopping journey from a desperate architect to the woman who brought down a corrupt dynasty, please hit that like button. We release thrilling, true-to-life mystery stories just like this one every single week. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our hidden treasure dramas. Share this video with your friends to see if they could survive the terrifying secrets of St. Jude.